The first buzz came just after I finalized the wireframes. My phone vibrated on the corner of my desk. A thin red banner blinking fraud alert, $45,000 charged at Malibu Palms Resort. I stared at the notification, unblinking. For a second, I thought maybe it was a glitch, a misread, something automated gone wrong. Then the second buzz hit. Same card, same amount, same hotel. I didn't drop the coffee cup, I just forgot I was holding it. It tipped sideways and soaked through the edge of my sketchbook, the marker ink bleeding into useless waves. I grabbed tissues, blotting instinctively, but the water was already merging with dried highlighter and 3 weeks of deadlines. I sat down slowly, barely breathing. My birthday, no messages, no calls, not even a text. Just this. I pulled up my banking app. The charges weren't just pending, they were approved. Room suites, spa packages, rooftop bar tabs. The card used was the platinum one, the one only I held. Or so I thought. With shaking hands, I dialed home. Mom answered after 4 rings. "Lissy, it's late. Is everything all right? There's $45,000 charged to my card." I said, "At Malibu Palms." A pause. Then the line crackled and Dad's voice came on. Jovial. "Callista, relax. Arden needed a weekend to unwind. She's been under a lot of stress lately. You gave her my card. It's not like she maxed it out." Mom said, "She's networking with some really promising people. You didn't think to ask me." Dad chuckled. "You'll earn it back." "You always do." I didn't respond. I just stared at the screen. My name printed above the debt. Their laughter still echoed in my ear when I ended the call and turned off my phone. The office lights hummed above me as I stared into the dark window, my reflection barely visible against the night skyline. They weren't even hiding it anymore. The next morning, I opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. Nestled between old contracts and tax receipts was a document I hadn't looked at in over a year. The deed to the house, signed and notarized. My name, in bold. It started with a foreclosure notice and a call that shook something loose in me. My father's voice had cracked when he said, "I just need a little help. Callie, just until I get back on my feet." I took a leave from my apartment, boxed up my studio gear, and moved back into the house with the chipped porch rail and the smell of rosemary from my mother's garden. The plan was 3 months 6, tops, long enough to stabilize things. I signed on as a guarantor for the mortgage, paid off the second lien, took over the utilities. My savings dwindled faster than I expected, but they were grateful. At least, they said they were. Arden had already moved back months earlier, claiming burnout after a failed internship in LA. She wore silk robes at noon and ordered brain fuel smoothies from that overpriced health store downtown. "I've got something big coming," she'd say, flipping through glossy startup pitch decks on her laptop while ignoring the past due notices stacking up by the door. I covered those too. The pantry didn't stock itself. Neither did the Wi-Fi, the gas, the phone plans still tied to my name. I picked up freelance work to pad the gaps my full-time job couldn't cover. I stopped buying new clothes, skipped dentist appointments, told myself it was just for now. Every time I raised a concern, my mother would tilt her head with that gentle condescension only she could perfect. "She's trying her best." Callista. Not everyone's built like you, built like me. What did that even mean? That I didn't break, that I didn't say no. I tried not to keep track. I tried not to count, but I did. 19 months of Sunday dinners where I cooked and they criticized the spice levels. 19 months of just this once and we'll pay you back when things improve. 19 months of pretending this was still a family and not a contract I never agreed to sign. That night, after they laughed off the Malibu charge, I sat at the kitchen table and scrolled through Arden's Instagram. There she was, poolside, captioned, "Manifesting. Deserve this." In the corner of the photo sat a pale pink handbag with gold hardware. I recognized it instantly. I'd seen it behind Mom's chair last week. I couldn't sleep that night. My body stayed still, but my thoughts moved like a needle skipping on a broken record back to the voice in my ear. Dad's chuckle. Mom's silence. Arden's casual theft wrapped in entitlement. I got out of bed around 3 and padded into the home office I once thought I'd use for building something of my own. I opened my laptop, logged into my bank. My hands didn't shake this time. They moved with mechanical precision tabs, filters, monthly statements, transaction histories. Over $3,000 at Whole Foods, nearly $2,000 at Nordstrom, 2 separate Uber rides to Malibu on back-to-back weekends, both charged to my account, and then Bristol Jewelers, $750. That was new. In my email, I found an auto-forwarded message from the credit card company. At the bottom, voice message transcription not available. Audio attached. I clicked play. Don't worry. Arden's voice laughed through the speaker. She never checks anything until the end of the month. By then, it's all already paid. A rustle. A muffled clink of glass. Besides, Dad said it's basically family money. What's she gonna do? Call the cops? Silence. Then Mom's voice. Faint but audible. She's always been uptight about money. Not like you. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until my vision blurred. I stood up too fast and stumbled toward the hallway. My stomach turned so violently I had to grip the banister. I made it to the bathroom just in time. Afterward, I sat on the cold tile floor, knees to chest, breath shallow. Everything in me wanted to scream, confront, demand. But instead, I stood, rinsed my mouth, and walked back into the office. I opened the bottom drawer. That drawer had always been my father's domain folders labeled in neat handwriting. Old tax returns, manuals for tools he never used anymore. But tucked near the back was a brown envelope I hadn't touched since the day we notarized it. The quitclaim deed, transferring full ownership of the house to me. A temporary fix, he'd said, to shield the property during the lien investigation. No one had mentioned it since. Maybe they'd forgotten. Maybe they thought I had. I ran my finger over the signature line. Wallace Dorn. Witnessed. Stamped. Legal. I placed it gently on the desk, next to the list of charges, and opened a clean folder. A plan was already forming before I realized I was making one. I remembered the day clearly now, 19 months ago, sitting across from Dad in the attorney's office. Both of us sweating through the silence as the notary slid the documents across the table. He didn't look at me when he signed them, said it was just a temporary maneuver to protect the house from the lien. I'd believed him. Now I understood. That signature hadn't just transferred legal ownership, it handed me the one thing they never thought I'd use. Leverage. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I opened a clean spreadsheet and began categorizing every dollar I'd spent since moving back. Mortgage payments, utility bills, medical debts, Arden's spa treatments. When they'd been disguised as family health expenses, I kept the tone clinical, the columns neat. Facts couldn't be debated. That same afternoon, I called Aunt Rosamond. I hadn't spoken to her since the Christmas before the collapse, when she brought her own food because she didn't trust Lucille's shortcuts with poultry. She picked up on the second ring. Callista. She said, "I was wondering when I'd hear from you." I didn't cry. I told her the facts, the charges, the voicemail, the deed. She listened without interruption. Then I've got housing above the bistro in Santa Fe, staff quarters, 3 rooms, modest, but clean, and work dishwashing, food prep, host shifts, real pay for real work. She didn't ask if they'd accept. She just said, give them a choice, then step back. That night, I pulled Arden's old card from the junk drawer still active, apparently, and booked 3 one-way tickets. Santa Fe, Sunday morning departure. In the days that followed, I kept my routine unchanged. I cooked dinner. I smiled when spoken to. I said nothing when Mom asked if I could cover the water bill. When Friday arrived, I handed them an envelope. Weekend getaway. I said, my treat. I watched their car pull out of the driveway, suitcases crammed in the trunk. voices high with excitement. By the time they reached the resort, the realtor had already scheduled the open house. I used Arden's old credit card for the tickets, the one she forgot about when she started begging poverty on Instagram. It was still linked to her vanity email account, the one she used for networking with strangers who promised investments over brunch. She probably hadn't checked the balance in over a year. 3 one-way tickets. Santa Fe, Sunday morning departure. I didn't include a return. Next came the packing. Not for them, only for me. The things I'd bought, the tools I used, the pieces of my life they'd mistaken for shared property. I digitized every receipt, screenshot every message, and made backup copies of the voicemail where they laughed about stealing from me. I called the real estate agent Rosamond had recommended Sandra. Efficient, discreet. She didn't flinch when I said, "The family doesn't know I'm selling yet. Do you have legal ownership? I do. That's all I need." I moved fast, while they lounged on the beach at a resort I'd never afford for myself. I staged the house. Neutral towels, light-scented candles, a fresh coat of paint over the water stain in the guest bathroom. By Saturday evening, the professional photos were up. The listing went live at sunrise. Then I waited. Sunday morning, I stood at the front window, watching the Uber pull into the driveway. Arden was still shouting something out the window, hair twisted up in a bun that probably took an hour to style. My parents were smiling. Luggage was tossed in without care. They didn't even wave goodbye. The moment the car disappeared around the corner, I dialed Sandra. "They're gone," I said. "Perfect." She replied, "Open house is at noon. I'll bring the sign." I walked through the house with a kind of quiet I hadn't felt in years. I touched the banister I'd once helped sand with my father when I was 11, the cabinet handle my mother always said she'd replace but never did. Then I locked the door, not to protect them from the outside world, but to protect what was left of me from them. They arrived mid-afternoon, expecting applause. I heard the car door slam first, then the slow rise of Arden's voice, sharp and confused, cutting through the stillness of the neighborhood like a knife. "What the hell is this?" The sold sign stood firm in the front yard, staked in the dry grass where my father's hydrangeas used to bloom. My family stood in front of it like someone had planted a gravestone on sacred land. I stepped out of the house and onto the porch, a manila folder tucked under one arm. They turned in unison. Arden still wore her designer sunglasses, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. Mom's face crumpled immediately, like she'd rehearsed it. Dad's mouth opened and closed, looking for the right lie. "Lissy," Mom said, voice cracking. "There's been a mistake." "No," I said calmly. "There hasn't." Dad took a step forward. "Sweetheart, this isn't what we discussed. You were just going to hold the deed for tax protection. You signed it." I replied. "It's legal. It's binding. It's mine." I stepped off the porch and handed them each a document one by one. Arden got the list of charges in her name, transferred debt, interest rates, payment schedule. Mom received a breakdown of what I'd paid for over 19 months. Annotated, itemized, every grocery run, every doctor's visit, every loan payoff they'd forgotten to thank me for. Dad held the job contracts from Aunt Rosamond's bistro, entry-level positions, staff housing, no favors, no shortcuts. Arden's voice rose immediately. "You can't be serious. This is theft. You stole our house." I didn't flinch. "I sold my house." "You are out of your mind." She spat. "I'll sue you. I'll ruin you. You'll regret this." Mom had gone quiet, tears streaming now, whispering my name like it might soften me. Dad kept muttering something about miscommunication, about family, about forgiveness. I didn't answer their noise. I simply stepped back, letting it roll past me. "You have 2 choices," I said. "You can take the jobs, go to Santa Fe, start over, or—" Arden tore up her page in half, then into quarters, flinging the pieces into the air like confetti. "You think this makes you better than us? No," I said, voice low. "It just makes me free." Mom sank onto the lawn, sobbing into her hands. Dad looked away. Arden stormed toward the car, kicking the gravel as she passed. I stood there until their noise ran out. No more guilt. I said to no one in particular. No more emotional blackmail. I turned toward the house. Behind me, the sold sign stood tall. And ahead, a lock I finally owned the key to. The locksmith arrived just before noon. He was polite, didn't ask questions when I said, "All exterior locks." I signed the invoice and watched him drive off, the new keys resting cool and solid in my palm. That night, I slept for the first time in weeks without my phone face up on the nightstand. No late-night voicemails, no subtle threats hidden in family guilt. Just stillness. 2 days later, I moved into my new apartment, small, clean, downtown. I unpacked slowly, deliberately, choosing where each item went as if I were stitching together a new version of myself. The kitchen window faced east. Every morning, light poured across the floor like a promise I hadn't dared believe in until now. At work, the buzz of deadlines returned quickly, but I was different. Mark from marketing leaned against my doorframe before lunch. "Hey, Callista," he started. "I'm in a tight spot with the print vendor. Would you mind fronting the deposit, just until reimbursements go through?" Old Callista would have smiled, said yes, and rearranged her entire week to make sure someone else's comfort came first. This version of me just looked up and said, "That's something accounting needs to approve. They can expedite if you explain the urgency." His face registered surprise, maybe even mild irritation, but he nodded and left. I turned back to my screen without skipping a beat. Later that afternoon, I opened the final box in my office, a small frame I'd picked up weeks ago but never used. I slid in a printed quote I'd saved to my phone long ago and hung it above my desk. "Kindness without boundaries is self-erasure." I stepped back and read the words aloud, not as a mantra, but as a line drawn cleanly in the sand. My inbox pinged again, this time from Aunt Rosamond. The subject line read, "Update from Santa Fe." The envelope was pale blue, addressed in Arden's handwriting. My name, centered and carefully underlined, "No return address." But I knew it immediately. I waited until I was inside. The door locked behind me. Before I slid it open, inside was a folded sheet of thick stationery and a smaller envelope packed with crisp bills. $4,000. I stared at it longer than I meant to. Then I unfolded the note. "Callista, this is the first payment. I'll send the same amount monthly until it's repaid. I know I won't fix anything this way, not really, but you were right. Real respect is earned, and I had to lose everything to figure out what that means. Don't think this is forgiveness. I'm not asking for that. Just a clean slate eventually, if that's ever possible. Arden." No apology, no excuses. For once, just the truth. I didn't cry. I didn't feel much of anything. Honestly, the money was clean, the bills uncreased. It smelled like a bank vault, like formality and distance and dignity. I walked it to my home office and placed it in a drawer labeled Future Home Fund. Not checking, not spending, just holding. I slipped the letter into a separate folder beneath it, alongside the deed and the notarized documents from the sale. Not as evidence, not anymore, but not discarded either. There was something in me quiet, not hopeful, but no longer bitter, like the first breath after staying underwater too long. Later that evening, I pulled up Aunt Rosamond's email and read her update again. Arden had taken the morning prep shift at the bistro. Mom was arranging fresh-cut flowers. Dad was learning to expedite. Rosamond said they were still resistant to rules, but not disrespectful. Not anymore. The letter sat on my desk all night. I didn't reread it, just saw the curve of my name in Arden's careful script and left the lamp on beside it. Morning light crept through the blinds before I finally turned it off. By then, I was already making a list: groceries, insurance renewals, paint samples for a future I could finally choose on my own. Rosamond met me at the back door of the bistro, wiping flour from her hands. She didn't say much, just nodded toward the small patio and set a teapot between us. I sat quietly, watching through the kitchen window. Mom was arranging flowers in small glass jars. Dad moved between stations with a clipboard, slower than I remembered, but purposeful. Arden passed by once with a tray in her hand. She didn't see me, or maybe she did and chose not to react. We didn't speak, but they nodded when they noticed. That was enough. They're working, Rosamond said. Pouring my cup. On more than just the menu. I smiled, not out of satisfaction, but relief. Not everything had to be reconciled to be righted. She looked at me for a long moment. You were never cruel, Callista. Just done. There's a difference. I stayed an hour longer than planned. We didn't talk about them much. We talked about business, about the apartment I was thinking of buying, about how good Santa Clara air felt when you stopped holding your breath in it. As I drove back up the coast, the sun dipped low and the sky turned amber. My phone buzzed in the passenger seat. A single text from my mother, happy birthday. No exclamation mark, no apology. Just that. I glanced at it once, then turned the screen face down. I didn't need anything from them anymore. Not acknowledgement, not regret, not even love. Some things, I finally understood, didn't have to be earned back. Some things didn't need to be answered.